What does Kalvin Phillips bring to our wonderful West Ham? It wasn't that long ago that West Ham were linked to bringing Kalvin Phillips in from Leeds United. David Moyes has been a keen admirer of Kalvin Phillips for going on a couple of years. He probably did a little bit of scouting of him before. I wonder if he was preparing for life after Rice when we made that big offer and it was knocked back. And then suddenly he appeared at Manchester City for a fee of about £5 million less than what West Ham offered to bring the central midfielder into the club. Kalvin Phillips then ended up at Manchester City and was billed as Fernandinho's replacement. He had all the attributes to potentially fit into that Manchester City midfield, and it didn't really work out to the way that he had planned. One thing we've got to take note of is the fact that the best manager in the world scouted him and wanted him at his club. Pep Guardiola shown a keen interest in what Kalvin Phillips is capable of doing. This is what this video is about. What will Kalvin Phillips bring to West Ham? Phillips was mostly a spectator last year under Pep Guardiola's side who got the treble. And he's only made 6 starts so far in 18 months since joining the club, playing only 7% of his available Premier League minutes to him. So that doesn't read that well. And a period out could also be a red flag. It's not a period out for injuries. It's just a long time out from playing competitive, regular games at domestic league level. He's always favoured for England. But when you look at the chain of players that Manchester City have available to them and the player that he would have to try and knock out of their position, that player is Rodri. What else are you going to do? There's not many other players in the world that could try and knock Rodri off that pedestal. Even Manchester City didn't even try and sign whom we and others believe was one of the best up-and-coming central midfielders in the world as Declan Rice, and they didn't push the boat out to get him because they have Rodri, a player that is just inevitably so important to Manchester City. And they become so dependent on the Spaniard that they've lost all 3 Premier League games that he's missed, and their struggles are without really showing, are showing that when, Kalvin Phillips doesn't really get a start. He wanted to change Pep Guardiola's mind, and he insisted that he was going to stay last summer. But it was very telling when Rodri was unavailable for the first half of that season that Phillips was really looking overlooked, and you could say his way was going to be out. But West Ham, as we know, have agreed to sign him on an initial loan deal. And let's not also forget what Pep Guardiola said once upon a time about Phillips when he returned from the World Cup. Probably unfair comments saying that he was overweight last season, and that was down to the lack of consistent playing time. But he has also came out and said that he praises his attitude and professionalism. What he said back in October was he is behaving incredibly. He doesn't deserve what's happened to him, and I am so sorry. He said he's a perfect example as a character. And even at international level, Gareth Southgate favours a Kalvin Phillips. He loves a Kalvin Phillips. He said he's a super boy with a lot of humility. He said he keeps going on and says he's got plenty to offer in the game. And that's probably why you see him be included on a regular occasion in the England squads and in the England setups. But where can we really define Kalvin Phillips' career? Well, it's under the time when he played at Leeds United under a specific manager who West Ham were linked to once upon a time, and that was Marcelo Bielsa. And he began his rise of prominence through the ranks at Leeds United and helped them achieve promotion from the Championship and then establish himself as a top-flight Premier League player. And obviously, he is Leeds born and bred, loves the club. But Bielsa has such a big, strong admiration for the player. In actual fact, I decided to get some of the quotes that he said about Kalvin Phillips at the time. This is what Bielsa said about Kalvin Phillips. He said he is a very good passer over short and long distances, and he always knows what's happening around him. He is aware of where the opponents are when he needs to recover the ball, and he is also aware where his teammates are once he has recovered it. He knows how to assess danger, and he takes good decisions on the pitch. He is good at knowing which threat he needs to neutralize as a priority at any given time. You can't help but think that that is reasonably an exciting analogy of a player that you think, do we need? But in actual fact, does he add strength to our squad? Absolutely. If we can get anywhere near the state he was in when he was at Leeds United, let's not discredit and take away the fact that when you don't play game time, it doesn't mean that you're not a good player. It doesn't mean that you've gone down the ranks, but you've just signed for questionably the best club in the world, who attract the best players in the world. And the position you came into just so happens to have the best player in the world playing in that position. So we have to take that into consideration. We really, really do. I thought I'd add you a little picture of Kalvin Phillips once when he played, of course, for Leeds United as a young lad. And he said the qualities that Kalvin Phillips has are quite difficult to notice, that given the fact that most people focus on the results and the scores. But he actually, where he got the name, the Yorkshire Pirlo from is the fact that he likened him to a Andrea Pirlo, and even Diego Simone. If you've ever seen Kalvin Phillips play, like, you can see he chases the ball down like an animal, and he's quite rough, and he's capable of probably a reasonably dirty tackle as well. And he was asked if he saw similarities with Simone, and he said they're both combative players who are comfortable when there are disputes or there is friction on the pitch. Someone, of course, also has a very good passing ability. And it was high praise, left, right, and centre from any manager that's managed Kalvin Phillips. And when they sold Kalvin Phillips, the one thing that Leeds missed was the ball-winning ability. And over the course of the season, he actually won possession at a higher rate than any other player in the Premier League. So in the 21-22 seasons, most possessions won per 90 minutes. Kalvin Phillips won the ball on average over 10 times in a game. Even one more than Rodri on average at the time. And then without him, suddenly they were conceding goals left, right, and centre. Of course, Leeds went through the transition of getting rid of Marcelo Bielsa and bringing in Jesse March. And that obviously, look how that worked out for them. And then he went across to Manchester City. But what else does he have? What else can he bring? Gareth Southgate said he is a very good player who's reliable with his rebounding off the ball in midfield. His short passing game is of very, very important in the game. But equally, one of his biggest attributes is his strength, is his distribution over long distances. During the 1920 season under Bielsa, he actually completed, you ready for this? 136 out of 215 long passes. That's 64% success rate, placing him among the Premier League's best. What's that? And those passes were usually to change the direction and the switch of play, which meant that if you had clever players on the other end of it, then they could read the game really well, and you could really progress that team moving forward, i.e., hello, Kudos, Bowen, Paquetá. If you've got that from a deep line role, that definitely is an exciting attribute. You've got a player in who can play the ball long, alongside a player who was up in the stats when he played at Ajax with Edson Alvarez. It's really an exciting prospect. Now, he is a player that I am quite excited about bringing into the club. And some of you don't think, not all of you, but some of you have said before, why are we looking at Phillips, an area we don't need to bring strength and depth in? But I think we do need to look at the strength and depth. Does he knock Souček off the pedestal? I'm not so sure he definitely does. We have to wait and see what is going to happen, what is going to progress moving forward. There's probably going to be an element of coming into the club and getting yourself match fit and match ready because you've not been playing a lot of game time. But he'll probably want some form of assurances. And with all due respect, I think all the players want some form of assurances that they're going to get some first team football. But there's so many options when it comes to Kalvin Phillips. You could play him in the middle and drop Edson Alvarez into defense. Or you could play him, JWP, and Alvarez together and drop Souček. Souček does give you a goal threat. But then, if you look at his all-round game, losing that goal threat to create more goal threats, what's the important outlet? Either way, bringing in Kalvin Phillips with four strong central midfielders in our team. 4 central midfielders, adding that to the 3 attackers with any other players coming in over this window is definitely an exciting prospect when they're all fit. And as long as they stay fit, that's the key element. I've got to say massive thanks to Sky Sports because the story they've done in Kalvin Phillips and what he has to offer has been phenomenal and given me even a further insight into him and stuff that, I've always kind of rated him as a player. And when West Ham were linked to bringing him in, I did genuinely think he could have been the kind of Rice replacement, but then it became pride over the fact that Rice was in England and played for West Ham, and you've always got your players back. Now I've got Phillips back once he signs for the club. When we're waiting for that to happen. The medical's apparently been booked for today, so I'm assuming we'll hear pretty soon when Mr. Kalvin Phillips ends up being a West Ham player. All day yesterday, all we heard was loan fees being agreed, players agreed. There's an option to buy. There's no option to buy. There's an option to buy. There's no option to buy. One thing I will understand is there will always be an option to buy. There will always be an option to buy. Just whether or not the club wants to take it up and whether or not the club wants to sell. The obligation to buy is when they guaranteed the purchase. So there you go. That's what I think Kalvin Phillips will bring to West Ham. Good strength and depth, good ball playing, good vision, good ball passing, long distance, even a little bit of short distance, a bit of extra bite in that midfield. My God, we're going to frighten people left, right, and centre when they look at that midfield. And then we just need to shore up our defence. That's where we need to look at. Hope you've enjoyed that. Join us later on for the Hammers headlines. Come on, you hands.